Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss whether or not the budget announcement this week will work for or against the Conservatives' hopes to turn their political fortunes around next year as we gear up for the general election. The budget doesn't actually help anyone, other than the top 1%, of course, and the standard of living is still squeezed, so you would think not, but the reality of a budget matters less than the perception for voters. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I alluded a little bit yesterday to the idea that the budget announcement on Wednesday gave nothing to ordinary households. It contained, in the main, I suppose, three types of statement that I picked up on. The first was keeping prices high and claiming it was a saving. For example, there was continued cap on the cost of a unit of energy, but that's still the highest in Europe and double what it was a year and a half ago. The Chancellor also boasted about freezing fuel duty, but it was he who threatened to put it up in the first place. So these aren't savings to anyone, but the Tories are claiming that they are, based on comparing it to a parallel universe where they went up. You know, the aim is to fool voters into thinking that the cost of living might seem bad, but it would have been even worse were it not for their stunning economic moves. The second type of statement was the announcement of things that just aren't there at all. For example, the 30 hours of free childcare. It's not actually in the budget. They just announced it as if it was. They say the plan is to introduce it in 2025, so that's after the election. So what they're saying is, we intend to put it in the 2025 budget. I saw the Welsh Conservative leader today trying to say, oh, the Welsh government, the Senate's going to get this money for 30 hours of free childcare. Will Labour make sure that people get it? It's like, no, they didn't. It's not in the budget, anywhere in the budget at all. They're saying that it will be in the budget in a couple of years' time. But I remember a couple of years ago when the government said that in the 2023 budget, the common rate of income tax would go from 20% to 19%. Has it? No, it has not. So whatever you say will be in a budget in 2 years' time, utterly irrelevant. Is it in the budget now? No, then it doesn't exist. So it's not something they're introducing. If they win that election, they'll come up with some excuse not to deliver it at all. They do this every time they win an election. There's always some excuse given for not delivering on what they promised before the election. And if Labour win, as is very likely, and let's say they can't implement it immediately because the economy is knackered, the Tories will claim that Labour are failing to deliver this boon to ordinary families that the Tories already budgeted for, which they haven't. These sorts of statements are designed not only to dangle carrots for voters ahead of the election, but to beat Labour up if there is a change of government in the hopes of working their way back to contention for the following election. Third type of statement were the actual tax breaks, but only for the richest. They are linking these benefits for the top 1% as being good for the economy and as a result somehow good for the rest of us. Trickle-down economics without calling it trickle-down economics. And as I also mentioned yesterday, they're playing a little bit of a cunning tactic, I think, here. Last year, Labour announced that they would remove the pension cap for doctors in an effort to prevent early retirement. We've got a severe shortage of doctors in the NHS. And, you know, if there is a chance that some of them are retiring early for pension reasons, effectively tax reasons, and you know, Labour, of course, are planning to fund lots of new medical school places, but we don't see that for years. That we don't see the doctors at the end of it. It takes a long time to train. So keeping experienced doctors working longer has to be a crucial part of any strategy for the NHS. So when Labour announced this policy last year, removing the pension cap for doctors, the Tories said, oh, it's unaffordable. Well, now the Tories are promising to remove the pension cap for everyone. Again, this is something that only benefits the rich, and because you need £1 million in your pension pot to benefit at all. But it's funny how it was unaffordable to remove the cap for just doctors, but not unaffordable to remove the cap for basically everyone, doctors included. But don't expect the media to point that one out. However, Labour do not support the more universal policy and say they will reverse it. Well, this is a bold move. The Tories, of course, are now playing three games on the back of this. The first is to conflate the two policies, to say it's basically the same thing and that Labour are flip-flopping for political gain. Oh, last year, they're accusing Labour of saying they supported this policy last year. Now this year, they're saying they'll reverse it. In reality, it's not the same policy. But it's a good line of attack from the Tories, one which Labour will need to deal with. The second game is to claim that Labour's attack on this policy will mean a rush of doctors retiring before the next election. The idea is that if you've got someone thinking, oh, I've got a pension benefit now, oh, but if the next government that comes in is going to remove it, I'd better retire quickly while I can still use it, which doesn't even work. But, you know, so they're saying that Labour's promise to reverse it is going to hurt the NHS. The NHS is a big deal for voters, especially the elderly. So Labour need to be clear that the policy to remove the cap for doctors was their policy and they will maintain it. It's removing the cap for bankers that they object to. The third game is to claim that Labour are going to attack pensions in general. Obviously, far and away, the most important group of voters are the elderly. No other age group has a majority voting for the Conservatives in the polls. But recent polling has the Conservatives not that far ahead of Labour amongst even this prized voting bloc. So the Daily Telegraph headline today, that Labour's pension tax raid plan will hit millions, so that's what their headline is, could be something Labour need to tackle. It's a lie, of course, for multiple reasons. First of all, Labour have no pension tax plans at all, really. They're planning to reverse the Tories' plans to remove the universal cap, but that is still an overall tax cut, if you want to put it in those terms, because they still support it for doctors, or at least if they don't, I've not heard otherwise. Second, the plan won't hit millions because millions of people don't have a pension pot big enough to benefit from this Tory tax cut for the rich. In fact, I did wonder if they were playing on words here, because in the headline, the hit millions was in quotation marks. So first of all, they can then claim they were just quoting someone else, probably a Tory MP, without saying it's a Tory MP. And also I wondered if they would then argue they meant millions of pounds, not millions, because it just say hit millions. Well, we assume millions of people, but maybe they just meant millions of pounds worth of pension pot. Sounds childish, but this is the Tory client media for you. But Labour need to be alive to the danger of accusations of attacking pensions. So are the Tories onto something with their smoke and mirrors budget here? Well, although this is a potentially good line that they're taking, I've said as much, there are signs that it won't be enough. The Office for Budgetary Responsibility updated its forecast for the next few years. It's looking better than it did, because the last time they did it, Liz Truss had just finished her duel to the death with the letters. But it is still pretty bad news. The suggestion is that the standard of living is going to fall significantly this coming tax year, just as it has for the current one. Not as badly, but a fall is still a fall. It still means a real terms income cut. And a significant fall is noticeable by people. Sunak and Hunt are talking about their plans to halve inflation this year, even though they have no plans. Inflation will actually more than halve without them doing anything. Another con which allows them to say they did even better than planned when it happens. And someone in the Financial Times pointed out recently, inflation is way more important than growth for the election. Growth is important to people who are earning, who are economically active. Tends not to bother most elderly voters who are retired. So they are more concerned with inflation. This is why the Tories are pushing inflation very hard. But halved inflation is still high inflation. It still means that the real terms disposable income goes down, and for pensioners that is quite a big deal. This is why the Tories have to maintain the triple lock in order to keep pensions in line with inflation, but that's only the state pension. You know, a lot of pensioners will have their own private or work pension as well. That's the government aren't really doing much to maintain that in real terms. So if the personal inflation of many elderly voters is above the increase in their incomes, you know, their pensions, they're still going to face a drop in living standards, just like their children and the grandchildren definitely will be. Another thing to point out, this pension plan by the Tories is quite a cunning one. It's quite a cunning one. So you think to yourself, so why did Labour come right out and say they would abolish it? See, there are lots of Tory policies which Labour have attacked and which, you know, in theory they could abolish. They haven't got the parliamentary time to abolish all of them. But, you know, there's plenty of Tory policies Labour have attacked without committing to repealing them. The reason being is because most policies tend to have a little kernel of use in them. And the Tories will focus the attention on the useful bit and distract from all the bad bits. So, for example, this policy now, they're focusing on the doctors, not the bankers, the doctors, which helps them also conflate it with Labour's policy. Labour don't want to fall into the trap of being accused of throwing out the baby with the bathwater with a reckless promise just to reverse an entire policy. It's like, well, you know, why you just change it? You're going to get rid of this bad stuff as well, this good stuff as well. So Labour could have focused attention on the fact that actually they could have just said, look, this is basically a Labour policy, which we're more than happy for them to adopt, but they've extended it to bankers being paid millions of pounds a year. And I still wonder if this wasn't the best thing to do, in all honesty. If asked if they should reverse it, they could have just said, you know, that they would, of course, be keeping the aspect of the policy which was theirs to begin with, but they'd have to look at whether they really want to let millionaire bankers keep the benefit without committing to anything. And you can always get away with that because you cannot write a budget 2 years in advance. You know, you're supposed to have a budget each year. Labour's first budget will be March 2025, not next week. But Labour have come right out and committed to reversing it. A bold move which may indicate that they don't think the Tories are getting any traction out of this policy. If they were even unsure, they'd have been cautious. I mean, they've been cautious on quite a lot of things. You know, this to me suggests that they are confident that this is a desperate Tory play by a team that's basically 10-0 down with 5 minutes left on the clock. In terms of the economy, the standard of living is set to fall all the way to the next election. And nothing in this phantom budget does anything to prevent it or to ease it. All the Tories have is a plan to convince voters that it would somehow be worse in this parallel universe where Labour are in charge, not them. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.